Hello, this is Sam, and welcome to an indie dev interview with a Unity game developer. I'll introduce my guest in a moment. Let me explain a little bit about today's video. So first about me, and then we'll get into the course content. My name is Samuel Asher Rivello. I am a Unity game developer with over 20 years of experience. About 10 years exclusively with Unity, and the last several years I've shifted into teaching Unity game development and interacting with devs like today's guest. I'm available for remote contract hire, specifically around creating educational content, onboarding materials for tools and SDKs around the Unity game development. So today's my guest, Jeffrey. Jeffrey, tell me a little bit about yourself. And also, I want to mention we're located here in Nairobi, Kenya. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Hey, my name is Jeffrey Gichuki, Jeffrey Gichuki, and I'm a developer I'm a team lead at Mekan Games, while also running my own studio where I'm the director, called Verdin Labs. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So one of the things we're going to talk about today is some of the journey from beginning as a Unity game developer, how you can build the skills, get some resources, and create an idea around a new game dev concept. So we'll be using Jeffrey's game here called Rachel's Grasp as one example. So give me just a couple sentences about Rachel's Grasp.
It's a narrative-based platforming adventure game delving into mental health.
Awesome. We'll talk about that connection to mental health as well today. So this video and a lot of the content that I'm creating online, be it free sample projects or video content, online courses, is all around a theme of Level Up Africa. I'm a digital nomad, and while I'm from the States, I've been located in Africa for the last couple of years and have been able to meet a lot of local game dev talent and organizations who are supporting the ecosystem. So you can take a look at this link here to see lots of other videos that I've done, both here in Kenya and across the continent. So first, let's start with Unity as a game dev tool and how we can learn more about what it offers us as game devs and how it fits into the game dev industry. So as younger people who are consuming a lot of the digital content that's out there are choosing exactly how they spend their time, we see that the gross majority of free time is spent playing games. Now, with the advent of the smartphone, this has brought a whole new part of the world into the gaming fold, and we see opportunities to being able to play games like sitting at home on your couch or while out in public transport or going through your day. So it's been able to integrate game dev to a lot wider of an audience. The game dev industry is tremendously huge. I don't mention it here on the slides, but I've recently seen that Forbes has analyzed the projected revenue of 2023. It's looking like $200 billion will be crossed as the total annual revenue for this year. Now, to put that in perspective, that's more revenue gained from the rest of the entertainment industry combined. That's more than television, streaming, and traditional. That's more than film, in cinema, home, DVD rental. That's more than the literary universe of all books published in the year. All of that combined does not compare to the revenue from game dev. And it's growing, particularly in the African continent. As game players, there's players that are increasing the amount of games they play and the amount of time they spend in double-digit growth. So it's a particularly big market here for targeting your game projects into the African continent. So you can see a little bit of the breakdown here. This is from last year, but in in the Middle East and in Africa, there's between 7 and 9 billion of that 200 billion being produced. So Unity as one choice, I'd say as game devs, there's about 20 different popular game engines that are out there. Unity is often one of the most popular mentioned ones because it has a huge commanding presence in the market. Of mobile games, which I mentioned, over 70% of the top 1,000 grossing games today were created with Unity. So it's particularly popular in that genre, as well as AR and VR. Unity pretty much owns those markets. But you can also use it outside of games for architecture, construction, engineering, film production. I recently did a video with a game dev who focuses on doing movies, cutscenes, and real-time renders inside the Unity game engine. So there's applications outside of just games. And then I always mention it, it's a little confusing that Unity is both the company as well as the editor that you open up, as well as all the services. So the name Unity is used in a few different places here. But typically when I talk about Unity, I'm meaning the Unity editor, which is a program kind of like Photoshop. You open it up and you spend your whole day working inside of it. So Unity has been around for about 15 years, and their original mission was to democratize game development. So Unity is currently completely free to use, and you can even use it for learning and building your first project. You only need to begin to pay for Unity to unlock additional features, which broadly speaking are relatively rare. You get all of the different subsystems available for free out of the box, and only if your company becomes very profitable, quite high in the range of what you would want to do as an indie, do you have to start paying the monthly fee, which again is quite reasonable. So as someone learning game dev or carrying your game dev ideas into an indie project, Unity is a fantastic place because it has lots of features and it's free. So when I think about all of the different things you can do inside of a game, some of the key systems to think about, kind of the essentials here, are the UI that you see around the screen here, being able to capture input from the user from a gamepad or touchscreen or keyboard or mouse, the audio that you render to the user, so that's sound effects and music, the graphics that we see rendered here, for example, that 3D world being rendered out as part of the graphics pipeline, animation for your characters, and then of course scripting. So inside Unity, that's using the C# programming language. Each game engine has a slightly different flavor for how they address this, but within Unity, we use C#. Now, those key features that I just mentioned fit into a large set of all the things that you can do within Unity. So let me ask you, Jeffrey, so as you were working on your game, what are some of the key features that you see here that were important for you?
Okay, so while I was working on my game, some of the key features that I ended up using were the animation, the audio, graphics, input, lighting, scripting, physics, pathfinding at a point, but I ended up reverting on that pathfinding.
Okay.
But some level of AI on the enemies that I use. I don't use visual scripting, but I used shaders and shader graph, as well as UI and UI toolkit, and recently VFX graph.
Cool. Now, Unity is able to do 2D or 3D gaming. So as you were coming up with your idea, how did you choose 2D or 3D?
I have familiarity with both 2D and 3D games, but I sat down and realized I was trying to tell a more narrative-based story. And my whole references, all my references were 2D games. So I thought it would have been the better route, especially in the medium that I'm trying to present. I think it achieves the goal and tells the story better.
Very good point. So there's so many systems here that you can choose from as game devs. Going back, as Jeffrey said, to think about the story that you want to tell or what the end user's experience is, and then choosing of all these different things, which are the parts that are most important. So that was great. So also, Unity has services. Now, features and services may feel a little similar, but you can think of features as the tools that are inside the engine, and services are on the back end. Things like saving your game progress or having two different game clients communicate for multiplayer. So as you were working on your game, are there any of the services here that you took advantage of?
No. While I was working on my game is purely offline, so it does not use any of these services.
Okay, cool. So like all the features, they're optional. You can choose the ones that work best for you. The services as well. So as Jeffrey mentioned, you can use no services, but if you wanted to integrate things like being able to save your game or being able to start it on mobile and play it on Steam and have it tell the same story with user progress, those are all things that you can add, and Unity provides those, as well as the community. If you wanted to have your game save and you didn't want to use the Unity solution, there's lots of community resources and third-party companies that you could use as well. So that's a bit about the services. Now that we have kind of Unity as a game engine to be our chosen one, let's say, there's also opportunities to level up how you learn about game dev. So there's some different approaches you could take. Just in the East African ecosystem at the university level, some of the key players are here. It's certainly not all of them. So tell me a little bit about your educational journey, Jeffrey.
So I joined Strathmore University in 2016. 2016, 2017. Yeah, I finished high school in 2016, so I joined Strathmore University in 2017. It was after a while of debating. I was trying to figure out my path in life, and I was trying to figure out where I wanted to go with myself. I always knew I wanted to work in video games. So when Strathmore had a presentation on Open Day, I went, and they had a course that teaches you programming as well as video games called computer science, or informatics and computer science.
Now, do you feel like the education that you went through there was mostly software and a little bit of games? How is the balance between general software and games as a specific topic?
The balance was mostly 90%, like 95, I'd even say 98% software and 2% games, because there was a unit called object-oriented programming, which is where we were supposed to be taught like the beginning of games. I remember the lecturer just told us to use Alice 3, the software, which is a very simple game engine, and it was a good start. But beyond that, I wish to progress further and started teaching myself Unity.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I'd say a lot of universities try to make their educational program kind of, let's say, fit into the legacy of the history of technology. So software as a science has been part of the university education system a lot longer than games. So games is kind of a newer topic. So that makes sense to have that 98% traditional software balance. Also, I find universities, as an educator myself, having worked at universities, they don't like to focus on particular technologies, feeling like the technologies may change, but we want to have more universal, principles, which makes sense. Maybe Unity is popular today and Unreal is popular tomorrow. So they don't necessarily want to make a course called Unity 101. They want to separate it. So I see a lot of universities a little hesitant to promote an individual software solution. Now, I think that as a game developer, you can learn a lot of the concepts separate from a particular game engine. So you could certainly start your journey in one game engine, learn a little bit more in a different one, or programming languages as well. You could learn some in one. But I'd say as an indie dev, there are benefits to picking one game engine and getting into it. You are going to be able to get a bit deeper, a bit more quickly into one particular solution and not have to relearn the basics of more than one engine. So Unity is a fantastic option to get started from an academic standpoint as well. So, you mentioned universities. Actually, I kind of brought up the idea of universities as one idea. When you were thinking about going to university, were you sure you wanted to do game dev and then you thought, how can I get educated? Or were you into programming and you've kind of picked game dev as a focus later?
When I go into university, I was very sure of getting into game development. And it was a very interesting route where I got into university, and all the skills that I've learned, all the things that I ended up learning, the data structures, the object-oriented programming, the MVC model structures that we usually used in now web-based development, all that I took it and condensed it into my game development journey, which has now been a very good, useful part of learning how to make very modular systems in games.
Very cool. Yeah, I think when I work together with game devs, it has a different feel if someone went through a university education. I think they have a broader understanding of core principles, and that is fantastic. But university is not the only solution out there. So in the States, we have four-year universities as kind of one idea. And then we have usually 1 or 2 year shorter education. You take it around the same age, 18, 19, 20. And we call those trade schools. I don't know what you call them here in Kenya. What would you call them?
sure.
Votech, maybe. We also use the word vocational technology.
Votech could work. I'm not sure, but I think Votech could work.
Yeah, okay. So each country has a different way of thinking of these. But broadly speaking, they tend to be shorter. They tend to be cheaper than universities. And they're much more open to make their classes about a specific technology. So you might see a school that says, learn Excel databases. Like they're very clear to say Microsoft Excel is taught here. They're very practical, they're very focused, and they're more on specific technologies. So some opportunities you have to learn could be shorter, cheaper, and more focused on trade schools. But again, you might be missing some of that broader picture of that 98% of software background there. So it's there's different benefits and there's different pros. The cost of university is a big one. In most cultures, the university education would be your most expensive way to learn. And then teaching yourself, as the third option I show on screen here, would be the cheapest. So what would you think would be the difference between teaching yourself just with tutorials and YouTubes and stuff like that versus a four-year university education? What's a little bit of the pro and con?
Considering I've experienced with both now, I'd say the pros of university is that it gives you a base, a really solid foundation to work with, as compared to self-taught. Like YouTube videos can teach you a very specific thing, and you'll be good at that specific thing. But in a sense, let's say you follow a tutorial, you will do it how you did it in the tutorial, but that might not be able to apply to another use case. But what I learned in university has taught me to be a lot more versatile, because now I have a lot more different use cases for what I know the tutorial, but I know I can just modify the code this way, here and there, cut this and that, and make it a bit more, different shape for a different project.
I think that's a very good point. And it's the best of both worlds if you're able to do university and then continue to teach yourself after, because you have that larger context about how to think, how to learn about learning, which is an incredibly powerful skill. So I would say people that want to get into game dev and they start just trying to teach themselves, some of the challenges there are that there's so much information out there. It's great, but you're not exactly sure. You might watch a video that says, this is the best technique, and the next day see something that says the complete opposite. And as a new person, you don't have the context to be able to know. So you end up getting a bit overwhelmed or confused or spending time down one path and then changing your mind. So having a bit of structure from a university education or a trade school is great as a starting place as well. So cool. Next, let's talk about, now that you've got some, Unity game engine, you've got some education, you're stepping into maybe creating a project, what are some ways you can find some support around that? Support, it could be additional resources, could be learning, it could be the financial support to fund an indie game idea. So one of the things that I came across here in Kenya was this concept of Crazy Hubs. So tell me a little bit about Crazy Hubs.
Okay, so at Mekan Games, we applied to the Crazy Hubs Accelerator program, which was 2-3-4 month project where they taught us how to make games within their industry. And it was very interesting because they also funded us, they taught us a lot, and out of that Crazy Hubs Accelerator program, we at Mekan Games came up with the president with over 15 million downloads globally. And even outside accelerators, they're very good for any solo developer to apply for. They're very helpful in your journey as a developer.
Very cool. So I haven't directly participated as a game dev within accelerators, but I've been part of the board or team that evaluates possible ideas, projects that we want to invest in as an accelerator. So broadly speaking, an accelerator has some resources and tools and money. They're looking for devs that have ideas, and those devs can apply. Then once you're in the program, as you mentioned, 3-4 months, you would be able to get some additional support, some additional structure that helps you focus. Like by this date, we want to have the game dev document describing your idea. And then by this date, we want to see one level of a demo. And then by this date, we want to see how it's going to be monetized. So they're able to put your idea onto some rails so that you're able to, let's say, progress in a straight and predictable fashion. Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Cool. So another idea that I've been thinking about myself, not as a game dev, but as a course instructor, is to use crowdfunding platforms. Now, I've invested in programs. I've been a backer of certain of programs on Kickstarter and Indiegogo, for example. The broad strokes here is that people put their young idea early in production, typically, for a game or any kind of startup or a tabletop game or whatever it is, a toy idea. It really could be anything, but let's say an early phase of a product. And they describe, hey, we're a team. We want to create this thing. We need some financial support. And if you invest in us, then you'll get a copy of our game in 6 months when it comes out, or you'll get a version of our app on iOS or Android when it comes out, or whatever. So here you're able to reach out to your potential audience of consumers and say, if you invest early, and you'll get a cheaper version of our product and also help us along the way. So I've been thinking about it almost like pre-sales. If I want to create a new course and I want to focus on a particular game dev topic, I can get validation by putting it here and seeing that there's an audience there. People that maybe want to spend $10 today instead of $100 for the finished course. They'll get the same great content, but they're able to help fund my development of that project. So do you have any experience using any crowdfunding?
No, I have no experience using crowdfunding as of yet.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we talked a little bit about it before shooting the video. So it's a cool idea. None of the platforms out there are video game specific, but it's a popular topic that you'll see across them. I think Kickstarter, it feels like the most popular, at least coming from the States. It's kind of the brand name we know, but there's like 20 different crowdfunding platforms out there. So you can give it a try and check it out if you want to invest in some other people's dreams or put your dream project on there and see if you can get some funding. So now that we've got all of those different resources in mind, let's talk about when you're coming up with your game idea, where do you find this inspiration? So for me, I was a game player first and then wanted to get educated in game development and start a game dev career. I went to a 4-year university in the States, since we were talking about universities, but I went to study art, and my entry into video games was to be on the graphic side. But most of my career switched over to the programming side. I had opportunities to learn that. I did a lot of self-teaching. We talked a bit about that as well. And most of my career has been on the tech side as a programmer, as a team leader. But having been a game player since I was a kid and continuing to now, that's a major place of inspiration for me. So where do you find that your game dev ideas come from?
My game dev ideas, given my history, I can talk a bit about my history with games. I started playing games like around 2004. My brother used to really thoroughly beat me in football. I remember it was a match, he won me 20-0 in FIFA, and in Mortal Kombat, it would just be the same thing where he just beats me in Mortal Kombat. It was one of the funniest things growing up. Though back then I wasn't laughing, but now I am, because looking back on it, they're fun memories. Those are the like earliest pushes to go into games and be really good at games so I can be better than him. And that kind of, since he never came back to games, I've always had that weird hole missing there. But beyond that, now I started putting my time more into playing like Call of Duty, a lot of narrative-based games like Uncharted, and beautiful games like BioShock. So a lot of those games really inspired like my journey into becoming a game dev, because I thought to myself that I want to create such beautiful, intricate narratives as I've witnessed with Uncharted and BioShock and many other games growing up.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So I had my background playing games since I was a kid as well. That was a lot of early Nintendo, Super Nintendo stuff through that, all the way through Xbox and PlayStation. So as a game dev, when you have your inspiration of a AAA project like Grand Theft Auto 5 or Uncharted, how do you go about taking that idea, which is quite big, and bringing it down into your first project? What are some things to think about?
A lot of the things to think about is how to condense that really big idea into like a really much smaller idea. Like you start off with a really strong foundation base that you will be building up upon. And let's say like with a Rachel's Grasp, I had a lot of reference with the games like Night in the Woods or Celeste. So when I looked at Celeste, I thought this platforming is really snappy and good. I'd want to create something like Celeste. I take that platforming mechanism from Celeste and I try to make it as snappy. And then Night in the Woods, I look at the story and I see how they use the camera narrative elements and I try to integrate that into the game. So it's a matter of like seeing the big picture that you want with like if I'm using a bigger reference and condensing it down into various smaller like references that you can each pick part and part by and put in your game.
Yeah, I think that's really good. So some of the things I'm hearing and what you're saying is the idea of condensing, which is taking a lot of stuff and bringing it down to a smaller scale. Because of course, as an individual or a small team, you don't have the same time, skills, resources as people that created Uncharted or Grand Theft Auto. Those two projects being some of the most expensive are hundreds of millions of dollars US with large companies with years of development and 30 to 70 developers working on it over time. So it is a daunting task to be inspired by that and then try and translate it. But condensing is good. Something else I really like about what you said is the snappy factor. So you're looking at a particular feeling that you're getting, a responsiveness, a snappiness to the controls. Yeah. So that's another way of not saying, oh, I want a world the size of Grand Theft Auto, but there's a theme or a feeling that I'm getting as a player, and I want to have that feeling in my game. So it's a bit more abstract and I guess more approachable. So Celeste is a very snappy, popular platformer. So you were able to integrate that into your project. Very cool. So tell me a little bit about some of the inspiration for Rachel's Grasp. I've got a couple slides here, I think 3 of existing apps and projects. So tell me a little bit about each of them.
So when I was looking into Rachel's Grasp specifically, I was looking into it as a game for dealing with now anxiety disorders, trying to teach you coping methods and just how you can better navigate your anxiety. So I looked at 3 applications when I was going through Rachel's Grasp. There were 3 games and there were 2 now external applications outside that were in games. Super Better is one of those games slash applications. Mm-hmm. It's basically an app that gives you like a quest, quote unquote, every day or every few hours. You can set it how many you want. It'll give you like go for a walk, get out of the house, so things that will help you in dealing with now your anxiety disorders. It's currently testing. It's still in testing, but it's designed by game designers and backed by scientists in a bid to now try and teach you more coping mechanisms through the application.
Very cool. So what I'm seeing here, just looking at these screenshots here, I haven't used this app, but it looks like what's called gamification.
Yeah.
So gamification is not particular to only games. Any piece of software that wants to take advantage of some of the lessons learned by the games industry, they can set achievement targets, reminders, get some motivation for the player to progress through really any type of task, be it learning or managing their own lifestyle or looking at their mental health and creating some kind of a game around it, so to speak. As a digital nomad, I use a VPN service, there's lots of popular ones, but I use NordVPN. I really like it. But recently they added gamification to it, and it feels like a bad mismatch to me. Like I opened it up, VPNs allow you to, let's say, mimic that your location is in a different country, which helps for security reasons when you're accessing certain things as a developer. Now, this is a tool. I don't want them to be encouraging me to use it more often, but I opened it up and it was like, you used our service 3 times this week. Can you use it 5? And I kind of felt offended as a user. I was like, I want you just to be a tool. I don't want you to like try and encourage me to use you. I'm using you exactly as often as I want. So in some cases, I feel as a user, it's a misfit. But here, I think it's a fantastic idea. As a user sitting down and using a tool like Super Better, who you're wanting to consider improving your own life by building new habits, the the qualities that are added to keep you retained as a user, keep you excited and motivated, help compare your progress to, maybe your friends if you choose to do that. Those are great tools. So take a look at another one here called Endeavor. Tell me a little bit about that.
So Endeavor is a therapeutic device, but it's a game on a specific tablet that they make and they send it to you. It's helped. It's used on children with ADHD. It's meant to help them now become more focused. So they do. It's actually something that needs clinical diagnosis so that you can use. But it's in testing abroad, and it was one of the projects that also inspired me because it's a good proof of concept that you can use games to kind of tackle a lot of these mental disorders and illnesses. Yes.
Now, I'm not familiar with Endeavor. I like learning about it here, but I just see the target audience of children.
Yes.
And here, in the previous example, gamification can take lessons learned from the games industry and bring them into non-game use cases. Here, I could imagine that because kids love to play games, by making your experience feel like a game, you can attract them and retain them as potential users. So again, we're seeing another case. Both of these are about mental health, which is important to what we're talking about. But I'm also just kind of thinking out loud about combining games with non-game use cases and being able to take advantage of that. So very cool. And then thirdly here, let's talk about Night in the Woods. Of these three, this is one I'm familiar with. I think it was a year or two ago that it came out, and I played quite a bit through it. So tell me a bit about how this was an inspiration for you.
So Night in the Woods came in at a very time when I was struggling with my own anxieties, and I think it talks very well about the struggles of being a young adult through the character of May. And many times through the things that she's feeling and how it brings up her journal. Whenever she's going through something pivotal in her life, she'll always draw something that's what she's feeling in the moment. So it does a lot of therapy techniques without even trying to showcase that. It's giving you therapy techniques like the journaling and things like that. So it was a very big help in my journey, as well as a big inspiration, because it really tackles a lot of that adulthood, young adult struggle that you have growing up.
Very cool. I think in a lot of Hollywood movies and AAA games, we're used to seeing heroes in our game that are always in control, always know exactly what they're doing. So smaller projects like this in the indie game dev market that are able to explore other ways that characters can interact in the world, perhaps not always having the right answers and being able to learn some tools to help cope. It's a very exciting way to play games and learn more about the human experience. So as you were coming up with your game idea, how was the issues of mental health, how was that an interesting area for you to explore in game dev?
So for me, mental health has always been a bit of a struggle growing up. I was diagnosed with mixed anxiety disorder. So it was a matter of figuring out how to deal with my anxiety and also trying to document that now through the game. So struggling with the mixed anxiety disorder, as well as now anxiety attacks and panic attacks, and trying to show how you can deal with that through now my game was now the goal of me getting into making Rachel's Grasp.
Very cool. And as an indie game dev, as you're sharing this project with other people, I imagine it's a very particular and interesting part of the game's story is that it connects with mental health. Also, I find as indies, when we explore a game dev subtopic like that, in some parts, making it so specific makes its audience smaller. But also maybe there's not a lot of games that explore that, so you can kind of stand out and be unique. How have you found that the subject of mental health in your game has helped or hurt when you talk to other people about it and try and promote the game?
In many ways, it helps in trying to better visualize what I'm trying to explain, through level design, making it this is usually I feel like I can't breathe, and designing the level in a manner that showcases that, or just showing struggles with even just trying to figure out what to do next.
Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, so now let's talk specifically about the game. We've teased around it a little bit, but in the next few slides, we'll talk specifically about what this game is that Jeffrey's created and how the game mechanics work. So the game is called Rachel's Grasp, and tell me a little bit about your game dev studio, as well as the title of the game and how that relates to the gameplay.
So I started Verdin Labs in around 2020. So that's 3 years ago when I was in high school, not high school, university. And it was just around the whole concept of trying to make games that now talk about mental health, games that deal with mental health. Rachel's Grasp, as said, came during a time in my final year when I was really struggling with anxiety. And this was also because of largely in part of COVID and all that lockdown that was happening at the time. But, sorry, could you repeat?
Yeah, I was just curious how they came up with the title of the game.
Oh, the title. Honestly, like, it's the whole thing about like trying to grasp at like the feeling of like you're grasping at straws when you're trying to figure out what like you're feeling, what you're going through, what you should do, a general sense of helplessness. So the title was supposed to encompass that feeling of helplessness, like I don't know what to do. I need to grasp something. Yeah.
And your game dev company, what's the title of that? Where does that word come from?
Verdin Labs. Okay, so Verdin is it's a if you know Pokemon, there's a Viridian Forest in the first Pokemon Red. So it's inspired by that forest in the sense it's Verdin, not Viridian. Okay. So I used to read it as Verdin Forest instead of Viridian Forest. So it was inspired by that forest in Pokemon.
Very cool. So here we've got a few animated GIFs just showing a little bit of the gameplay. So you mentioned earlier some of the influences were platforming games that you had played. I believe you said Celeste, which is a game I know well. You like the kind of snappy gameplay feel. So tell us a little bit about the gameplay mechanics.
It's a very simple like gameplay, like it's a very simple platforming puzzle game. It was never meant to have some fighting, but added fighting to just make it a bit more interesting here and there. So it's not like a bit dull, but supposed to be a platform puzzle type of game where you solve puzzles and then you get through the levels, like the puzzles and platforming all tied to now the themes of mental health that I wanted to discuss. Like for the underwater level GIF that you can see there now, the lack of breathing. The top right one is more of now just a cutscene in the start of the game where now your darker self like now comes and is like coming and now telling you, oh, I'll come and chase you no matter where you go. I'm always going to be here. That's like the feeling of anxiety, like always going to be there. That worry of, am I always going to have this anxiety inside like me for the rest of my life? First slide is at the end of now the platforming section of the second level. So the mechanics are all just supposed to be very simple puzzle solving and platforming mechanisms. Yeah.
And you created your game using Unity?
Yes.
So in each of these screenshots, we haven't talked much about technical details, but there's a few things I see. So in the first one, your character's got some kind of a blue magic in front of her. So that's with particle effects inside Unity, is that right?
Yeah, that's supposed to be a fairy that now is supposed to guide you through the forest and is supposed to guide you now not just through the forest, but through the rest of the game. So I used a particle system to also make it stand out a bit more so that you can see it there.
Super cool. And in the second screenshot, I see reflection of water, like as if the character's descending over a lake. Yeah. So how did you do that reflection inside Unity?
I used Unity shaders for that. I made a shader myself for that.
Cool. So I'm like just using shaders as one example. As a game dev, you script your game on top of the available tools that are there. Yeah. And sometimes there's not a shader that does what you need. So you might need to dig deeper into learning about that subsystem to create a shader that meets your needs. And in each area of Unity, there's going to be that. You're going to use the default camera until the default camera doesn't work, and you need to actually add on to it to do something customized for your needs. You can also reach out and look at what the community is doing as well. All right, so super cool. Love taking a look at that. Now we're going to kind of just summarize it up here. So overall, I want to say thanks to my guest here. I'll give him a chance here to just say goodbye to us. But I wanted to say that we've taken a look at a bit of what it's like for an indie game dev to choose which tools are out there that are interesting. We've landed on Unity as kind of our favorite, but there's tons of different options out there. So you want to choose one that meets your needs, and then you want to figure out how to learn more about it. You could do it through the education systems we talked about, teaching yourself. I have been a mentor at schools before where I help direct people who are doing self-learning. So that's another useful tip. If you're finding that just YouTube has too many videos for you and you're getting a bit overwhelmed, maybe ask around in your community and see if you can find someone who's got a little bit more experience so they can help guide you. They might tell you, this particular engine is their favorite, or this particular tutorial was helpful for them, and it might help you to be able to focus and find the highest quality content in all the stuff that's out there. Then we took a specific look at the inspiration for Jeffrey's game and at the mechanics as well. So tell me a little bit about, just kind of summarizing here, just in saying goodbye, how this game experience was for you, and what stage is the game at now? Kind of what's the next step for you?
So at the current stage, my game is still a prototype with just 2 levels in it. But as time passes on, all the stuff that I've learned professionally over the past 3 years under Mekan Games, as well as personally, privately under Verdin Labs, I'm going to combine all that to make a very much more smoother game, because the one that is there, the prototype that is there, is still very much unpolished. I can still clean up on things like the jumping, the fighting, but over time, it will reach the levels of story and narrative that I wish it to be, because it's a very narrative kind of driven experience. So yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And if users follow the link here, what are they able to see? Are they able to check out that particular game or other games that you have?
Okay, so when if anyone was when users check this link,
Mm-hmm.
when users click on this link, they will be able to see my studio, Verdin Labs, and the projects, the prototypes that I've worked on. And yeah, you'll be able to play Rachel's Grasp, Foxy's Adventure, and Night of the Undead, which is a nice small like shooter platformer that you can challenge yourself with. And yeah.
Very cool. Now, I'm very familiar with Itch as a place that people put their games. The students that I mentor, for example, often have their game portfolios there. So what do you see as Itch? If someone doesn't know what Itch is, how would you explain what it is?
I'd explain Itch the same way you've explained it. Like for me, I use it as a place of putting my portfolio as well. It's a nice platform where you can host, where they host game jams, they host a lot of events, a lot of game assets that you can use. It's a platform for game developers and really supportful to indie game developers. That is very good for us.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So that's it for today's video. My name is Sam. I am a Unity game dev instructor, and I am available for remote contract hire. Also, I have a couple courses that are available and newly created. You can follow that link there to check them out. One of them focuses on everything about 2D and 3D Unity physics. So if you're interested in creating a physics-based platformer inspired by what we saw today, or any other type of 2D, 3D physics, it talks about everything in Unity physics. The other course I have, which is a bit more advanced, is about how to architect your projects. So you may find as an indie game dev that when you get into making your first game or second game or third game, the code gets a little bit confused because you're learning as you go. So being able to take a step back and learn how to plan and architect your projects from the beginning so that, 6 months into a project, you're still having a happy day as a developer and not being overwhelmed by your own code. You can take a look at that course there. A couple other things I want to mention that I was just thinking about. So I met Jeffrey at a recent event here in Nairobi that was themed with Xbox Game Camp, where Microsoft is integrating more of their own education and accelerator programs through the continent here. We met there, and there was an opportunity for different people to showcase their games. And I saw Jeffrey's game, and we got talking, and I invited him to come on. So thank you very much for coming. I was excited to meet you, to see your project, and to talk with you today. Another thing that happened, it's kind of off the subject, but at that meeting, I was talking with somebody else who was there as a game fan because they're a local software developer. But when I said, oh, do you have a game that you're working on now? He said, no, I got a job at a local bank as a programmer because it was more safe and secure. So he and I talked about it. He was a recent college graduate, maybe a couple years into his career. And there was the lure of the security of a long-term job inside of a non-game dev industry, like banking is a classic example, or being a back-end dev for some larger company. So when you were studying software, you mentioned that you were interested in game dev from the beginning. Yeah. But did you ever feel the pull of kind of more secure, stable industries that you could contribute to? Is that something you'd ever think about doing in the future?
I did my internship at a internet solution-based business. Mm-hmm. And I realized quickly that I'm better at making games and more passionate at that. So I'm more interested as of now in like continuing making games, but I don't mind applying myself later on, maybe in life, maybe after I've hit like my goals in life.
Very cool. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that software developers can contribute. Games is just one. And the anecdote I was giving about the guy that I had met the other day, it's a classic story that from one standpoint, there's a lot of game dev studios and game dev opportunities that are very small companies. Maybe they can't pay you the same that a large bank could. So when we're all looking for some security in life, taking a longer term job that maybe pays a little better, that you're sure they'll exist in 5 years, it feels good. But if you have that game dev dream and you want to build a career out of it, I strongly recommend that all of your jobs be in the game dev industry. Because that lure, as nice as it is in certain areas of your life, safety, security, and things like that, you're going to be building skills and building a portfolio that becomes more divergent. Every year that you spend outside of the games industry, you're not able to keep up with the same trends, to build a portfolio that's relevant to games. So he was there because he's a passionate gamer and kind of an aspiring game dev. So he's connected with the community. I mean, one of the really cool things about game dev I find is that when you have community meetings, there's all sorts of hobbyists. There's people who have some other job, whether it's in software or something totally different. It's really exciting for me to participate in something that is frankly so cool that people want to do it on their nights and weekends. I don't imagine that every industry has hobbyist accountants, It's like game dev is so cool that accountants want to be hobbyist game devs. So I'm very fortunate to be in that. And I always recommend that, of course, paying the bills is important, but if you want to build a lifelong career in your dream of being a game dev, you got to make some hard choices, try and build that experience early. So that's just a random thought that I had. But again, thanks. And thanks to Jeffrey. And that's it for today. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me, Asher. This has been very good, and I liked this whole experience.
Awesome. I was happy to participate with you and to meet you and hear about your game project.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.